Hola, it is Joe Partavilla, and welcome back to another episode of Forbes Books Radio. And full disclosure, I have zero musical ability. I took guitar lessons after seeing the movie La Bamba, but I quit after a week. Turns out playing the guitar is really, really hard. But if you are musically inclined, I'd like to introduce you to a social professional network for musicians that has been called the LinkedIn for Creatives. And today, I'm joined by the CEO and co-founder of Vamper. His name is Josh Simons. Hey Josh, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So, first and foremost, it must suck to be a musician in this COVID-19 world.
Yes, I'd say, if I was still back in, because once upon a time I was in a band,
Yeah.
but if I was still back in my touring days, I'd be pretty frustrated right now. Obviously, live shows and concerts have all come to a complete stop, essentially. Rehearsal studios aren't open. People aren't doing press circuit tours or anything like that. So there's a lot that they're not doing. But I would say that it's presented people like myself on the music tech side of things, forced us to innovate and bring tools to those people that can supplant that lost income from live touring, especially. So, things like more affordable music distribution, film and TV sync representation, basically any other stream that musicians could previously been able to make money from, prioritize them and find ways to do that more effectively than in the past.
And Josh, I am old enough to remember when artists really didn't have to tour to make a lot of money. I mean, there was so much money in album sales and selling your rights to films and stuff like that. But nowadays, from what I understand, the touring industry is sort of the lifeblood of the music industry because you need that income nowadays because artists aren't getting as much money from those streams and from YouTube.
So there's a slight misconception. I mean, you're not wrong. It is the lifeblood of massive major acts, and it's also the lifeblood of very early indie acts that are playing clubs. It's not the lifeblood, though, for a lot of the working class musicians who that next step up where they have a crew and they have a full band and maybe they have a publicist and a whole lot of people behind them, an entire team that need to get paid, and the live shows are barely breaking even. So there's some way to go on that front as well. But certainly you're right in saying that all the other things you listed, like merchandise and getting a sync or for a song for TV or a film commercial, that stuff has definitely taken a hit in the last 2 decades. Having said that, music publishing has been growing year over year for, I think, well over a decade now. And the recorded music industry is looking to double in value over the next decade based on streaming alone.
Great.
So, it is getting to a point now. I've got some friends who are in, mid-sized bands back in Australia who can actually make a living just from their streaming revenue alone. So I guess our goal is to try and bring more artists into that position by making these tools more affordable to them. And that's where Vamper comes in.
Cool. And you did mention, you dropped that in that you were a musician at one point in your life. And I guess you're always a musician. It's like a Marine. You're always a musician. You're one of the suits now, the CEO of and co-founder of Vamper. So tell us about the genesis for the idea for this, app, for lack of a better word.
It was when I was a musician. So we'd had a really good, my band, which was called Buchanan, had a really great run in Australia. We'd sort of toured the country, I think 7 times. We were charting on national TV, national radio every day, one of the most played songs of the early 2010s. So we had a great run there, and I decided let's go to a much bigger market, and England is sort of my place of birth. So we relocated the band there, and we kind of felt like we were starting from scratch. We had no team. We didn't really know how that industry worked, even though it's all the music industry. Every region and country has its own, quirks, frankly. And it was kind of like, well, this is ridiculous. It took us 5 years to find any sort of fame or success in Australia, and now it feels like we're staring down the barrel of another 5 years here in the UK, and that doesn't feel practical or cost effective. So that was kind of where it was like, all right, there needs to be a simple and easy to use solution to solve some of these problems. Because what I identified very early on, even before we made the app, was that at the root of all accomplishment in the music, well, in any creative industry actually, is collaboration and working with other people. There's nothing that you can really truly achieve on your own. Even a singer-songwriter still works with people to, distribute their music, to publicize it once it's out there. So you really need to know how to find people. And there was no personnel finder. Like LinkedIn was rubbish at finding anyone useful in the music industry, and no one was particularly active in that respect back then. So it was quite simple to me, even though it seems like a profound idea. It was quite apparent that this is something that should be done. And so I sort of started plugging away.
And not to doubt your acumen, but you just mentioned you're a musician. At no point there did you mention that you are some sort of tech mogul. So how did you put together the sort of the back end of Vamper?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's where it started. So I've never been, like, I'm not a coder myself. I'm not a technical founder, although I'm sort of growing into.
Yeah, I bet you are. Yeah.
Yeah. But I've always had a very mechanical brain. So I mean, I knew sort of how these Tinder and Facebook and LinkedIn, I knew they were all powered by something called a graph database, and that was where I started. So I knew that just because of having a fairly mechanical head, I was like, if we start with that engine, everything will sort of start to unpack, and I'll learn along the way. That's probably one thing I took from music, which is that don't try and solve all the problems all at once. Start in a logical order, and things will generally present themselves over time. So I started with that, and fortunately my uncle was a professor in a data science university, or a university with a heavy focus on data science. So I sort of approached him. I said, are there any star students that might have an interest in this? And he said, no, but there's some staff students who might want to learn. And so we sort of started, before we even realized that we were in a startup, we started building a team. It's kind of like building a band in many ways. We started building this sort of group of people who were interested in this problem. And then over the course of 12 months, we'd sort of wireframed it, designed it, come up with a sort of plan of attack for how we were going to engineer it. But again, it wasn't my full-time job for a while. I was still in the band, and I was still touring the world. I think I was actually touring with Keith Urban at the time while we were still sort of working out what Vamper was. And then you start getting invited to pitch contests, and you start seeing your name in the press, and all of a sudden you're like, I guess I'm running a startup. And there was actually a very definitive moment where I made a decision that, okay, this is serious now. There's been a lot of people's time, and $500,000 sunk into this. We should probably play the game the way it's meant to be played. So there was a moment where I really did hang up my boots and said, okay, I am the CEO of Vamper. This is my full-time job, and now I don't have time to do anything else.
Well, what's fascinating about that whole story, though, Josh, is that you essentially created a think tank for a startup, but
Yes.
Where did the money come from? So were you self-financing, and had you already gained investors in the early going?
Yeah, so I financed a lot of it from royalties from music and stuff.
Yeah.
And when I say financed a lot of it, I mean I was not taking an income, but I didn't need to because I was getting enough through royalties, and so I was able to essentially commit my time for nothing. Although it's recognized in equity, obviously.
Yes, sure.
We did receive some early angel investments from friends in the music industry, and so I think that first round we did, and I'm just pulling this out of the top of my head, but it was around $300,000, and then we did another similar size round a couple of months later. But we didn't even know what the word round meant back then. We just knew that we had a budget. We put that think tank together. We need a designer. We need someone who can do this, that, and we sort of identified about 10 or 11 roles, and we sort of priced it all up, and we stuck to that. One thing you learn as a musician is how to come in under budget. So, and that's been really great thing to apply now that Vamper is sort of got, VC backers and massive angel backers and the crowd and all of that. It's important that you set very clear projections, forecasts, and then report on how you performed against that. And coming from the world of, running a band, it's very nice for me every year when I get to report that we've done better than we said we would, and for less money. So, I sort of took that mentality to setting up the company a bit as well. And we raised some money, and we promised that we'd get to 10,000 users, and we got to about 200,000 or something on the back of that initial tranche. Yeah.
I will say, though, when you mentioned that your first round you got 300K, that's not a lot. You probably went through that pretty quickly.
We did. Yeah.
I thought so.
We spent about $500,000 across the first 18 months, and then we now spend a lot more than that every month.
Yeah,
but,
I bet.
But we did. I mean, we stretched in total in the history of the company. We've only raised 1.9 million, which might. When I shouldn't have said only, there's probably some people listening going, I'd like that as startup money. But it's not a lot of money when you consider that we've been operating as a company for a group of companies for 5 years. That's like $400,000 a year. It's not a lot. And we do things on a very, very lean budget. I mean, we always refer back to the lean startup. We sort of do things that way. We test features that way. We all wear about 60 hats and don't get a lot of sleep, but I'd prefer to do it this way. It's exhilarating.
So, Josh, it's safe to say you're still in the scrappy CEO mode. You're not the CEO who gets to roll in the office at 12 o'clock in the afternoon and say, "Hey, how's everything going for the day?" You're still scraping by, right?
Oh my God! I went to bed last night at 1 a.m. and I was up at 7 for my first meeting. So I mean, it's very much I'm too hands on, but I have been fortunate this year to delegate a little bit more than I have in previous years. But again, it's not delegating out of laziness or anything. It's once you understand how something should be done, it's easier to delegate because you can be clearer with the instruction to the person that you're delegating to.
That's awesome. I want to get more into Vamper, but I want to ask you real quick. I've interviewed in my career thousands of musicians, and I worked in Morning Drive in New York City, and I came to realize that many, and I would say almost all musicians hated waking up early in the morning because the morning hours never existed for them. What was that transition like from a touring musician, very successful, playing shows year-round, to then essentially having a 9-to-5 job? Was that sort of I know it happened over time, but that still must have been a really, really strange transformation.
Well, I can tell you what happened. I started losing a bit of hair because I was burning the candle at both ends. I literally, like you just described it perfectly. I was getting up quite early for meetings and sort of an average work day for Vamper, and then at nighttime I'd be sort of heading into rehearsals or the recording studio. And I think a friend of mine who works in music publishing pulled me aside. She's a few years older and said, "You actually need to stop. You need to make a decision because you're going to get sick." And I mean, I did. I wasn't really well for a while. I was, as I say, burning the candle at both ends and not looking particularly healthy. And so it was an adjustment, but I did it over 2 or 3 years. Again, I've been very fortunate in the journey I've had to being a founder, in that I've had the luxury of time to let things become a new normal, whereas a lot of other founders are sort of thrust into it, and you either survive or die really as a founder. Right. But I was lucky.
See, I bet you are. So let's do this. Let's talk about, because we've sort of done broad strokes of what Vamper does, but for folks who are not familiar with the app, tell us essentially what it does.
It's effectively, I mean, LinkedIn for creatives is kind of how the press refers to it, but it is effectively a personnel discovery platform, which means in layman's terms, I am a bass player looking for a drummer, or I am a graphic designer looking for a management company, or I am an agent looking for the next big superstar. So it's sort of anything that you can imagine that exists in the creative ecosystem, so any role that is, any job title, we probably have it in our server. And so you are X looking for Y. So again, I'll bring it back to what I said at the start. It's a LinkedIn style platform, but specifically for creatives. And it started out just for musicians. So when we actually first launched it, it was just, like I said, drummers looking for bass players, the band. And then over time we started expanding it, and we realized, okay, this actually makes sense to broaden it out and bring in visual artists and vloggers and podcasters and people in all kinds of other creative domains. And in a not dissimilar way that sort of Facebook started out with colleges, and then it added high schools, and now it's everyone's aunt's favorite online destination. But it's a similar style, sort of slow expansion into additional fields.
That's cool. And one thing I've noticed with Vamper, which you probably are tired of the LinkedIn comparisons, but also you have this additional revenue stream with your Vamper Pro program. So tell us about that one.
It's not dissimilar to LinkedIn InMail, but it's a hell of a lot more. Vamper Pro is a whole series of tools. We call it the Vamper Pro bundle. And it's a series of tools bundled together that are value adds to the primary function of Vamper, which is our network, right? So what are those tools? Music distribution, you can directly contact someone that you might not be connected with. You can undo some of your decision making in the app that previously wasn't possible. You get to connect with more people per day. So as a lead generation tool, which is again similar to a LinkedIn product, you can use it to not spam but reach out to more people if that's your intention. Yeah. So it's basically just a whole series of value adds bundled together. I think it's about 16 features bundled together for basically the price of a coffee a month. The big one that everyone loves is music distribution. So typically you would do that on another website, which kind of brings me to an important point, that Vamper does a whole lot of things that other sites do, but it does it all in one place. And that's kind of the point of it. Right now, if you're a musician, you have your YouTube and you've got your videos there, and you've got your SoundCloud with your music there, and you might have CD Baby for distribution and Songtradr for publishing. With the way that Vamper's evolved and with Vamper Pro, that's all available in one place now. And you can even integrate your Instagram account into your Vamper profile as of this Friday. So you can do all of your social networking and manage your band's presence across all the other social networks in the one place, while also managing your distribution and managing your publishing catalog. So that's never been done before. In fact, it kind of renders us as the first 360-degree self-service artist platform. It's an interesting place to be. Is self-service something that people want or know how to use? Time will tell. But artist services is not scalable. So there's only so many A&R people with big budgets to be shared around all the artists in the world. There's far more artists around the world than there are suits. The idea is to make a platform that enables the artists so that they don't need a suit.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. It's great to hear that the music industry, which young people may not realize, was really slow to the draw to the digital music scape. I mean, it took, Napster really to awaken the whole music industry that, hey, people want to get their music this way. So do you see that now the music industry is a lot more tech savvy than it was back in the 90s, where they had no idea what they were doing and music was being pirated left and right?
Yeah, it is more tech savvy because it had to. It was kind of like keep up or die.
Yeah.
Napster really obviously hurt the music industry, probably the biggest blow it's ever received, and it's only just recovered in recent years back from where it was. I still think that the traditional music industry as we know it, with the major labels and major publishers, etc., the way that they sort of lay out their contracts and the way that they sort of set out recoupables and things like that, that's not compatible with the fast-moving digital world where streaming data is available in real time if they allow it. So that there's still a ways to go for the bigger industry or the old school industry to keep up. But as far as companies like Vamper, we don't have the restrictions of any of that legacy stuff. So we get to start at a very fast-paced place where people who do use our services can get access to their information in real time, can get a song onto iTunes within 72 hours with no middleman. So that's what I specialize in. It's really being at the forefront of that digital conversation.
That's cool. You know what I am nostalgic about, obviously working in radio for many years, is now it's sort of a thing of the past of like the big album drop. That doesn't exist anymore. Like, circle this date for this album to come out, because artists can so easily deliver music to their fans, which in a way is cool that if Drake wants to drop a single, he can just go ahead in the studio and then pop out and drop a single that gets 1 million downloads. But the days of this mega album, I know you're a little younger than I am. Do you miss that?
I missed that big time, man.
Okay.
When I was in my teens, even now as an adult, some of my favorite acts, if they announce a release date, some of my favorite bands still do, like Coldplay still does it.
Yeah.
But it's pretty rare, like you say. But I love when they set a date and then all the marketing leading up to it and the teaser, street single, and then you got the formal single. I miss that. But, the thing with the indie world of music and the world where artists can self-serve, you can still do all of that. My band, even though we were quite successful in Australia, we were still an indie band, and we still did stuff like that. We set release dates 3 months out, and then people would come to the concerts and get to hear new songs in advance, and we'd sort of hint at titles of songs and all. You can still do that. That's the artist experience, and that's what makes following an act special versus not special. So I think it's cool that Drake can drop a song on a whim, and I think it's cool that anyone can do that. But I think if you're working on a body of work, there's nothing stopping you from still making a dramatic rollout. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And before I let you go, I love talking to CEOs, but I don't think there's anything better for business journalists than to speak to a founder. Because of all things, even though you have the hat of the CEO, the founder, I think, is more of an important title. Like, I remember reading Mishan Vishlani, the guy who runs Mind Valley. He says he doesn't even put the word CEO on his business card
I was
anymore.
about to say I don't.
Yeah, that's great. Because to him, the word founder has a lot more resonance. And the reason I bring this up is, as the founder, Josh, what's the mission of Vampr? I mean, we know that basically, you'd like to make a lot of money out of this, and while also helping a lot of people. At the end of the day, what's Vampr's mission as the founder?
I'll give two-part answer to that, and I'll try and be quick. When I started it, I was very sincere and probably a little naive in saying that my mission was, even if one life was changed through this technology, that we will have succeeded. Well, we've done that millions of times over now, and people have gotten married after meeting on Vampr. Bands have gone on to be on the radio and sold lots of units, and so that's changed. Well, in fact, we've accomplished that. So we had to set a new mission, and really the mission now is to get it into. We've got an internal number. I'll tell you, it's 100 million users by the next 5 years.
Okay.
And the idea there is that at that point, you'll have a lot of natural network effects kick in, and it will be unequivocally the most useful tool and an essential tool, that's the key word, for every musician in the planet. And the idea is that musicians already have a few go-to things that they need. So a guitarist needs his guitar, a singer needs their microphone. Vampr should be a part of your growth strategy. And that's sort of the ambition, because there really is nothing else like it.
That's awesome. His name is Josh Simons. He is the founder and also the CEO of Vampr. Josh, I wish you the best of luck. I love to find out about these new apps that are coming around that really are, if you think about it, and I'm sure you do, is it changes people's lives. Because as easy it is for people to put something up on YouTube and then become a viral sensation, there's nothing like building that career from the ground up, and you are there at the base level of the mountain to help them climb. So I'm so happy what you're doing, and I'm sure you're proud of everything that's come along so far.
I am indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. And that's it for this edition of Forbes Books Radio, available every week on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.